So the release cadence is 6 to 8 times per year. Microsoft will allow you to skip up to 3 updates. So basically, this means that every 4th update, you have to take it. Typically, what we see in our clients is an update cadence of about 2 times per year is what we'll actually wind up taking. And this is a big change from AX12. So in AX12, you would update maybe you'd have an update like every 1.5 to 2 years. And they're typically a pretty large endeavor, almost like a reimplementation. So there'd be a lot of configuration work going on, a lot of testing going on. But for the web-based applications, we get a lot more updates, a lot more feature releases, which is one of the main benefits of going cloud. So why do we test every release? Well, one reason why is because D365 is customizable. You still have the ability to go in and add functionality in there if you need to add functionality in there. Not every SaaS platform is like that. We also typically, when we're talking about enterprise scale applications like D365 Finance and Supply Chain, usually means we have a lot higher complexity of processes and a lot higher volume of transactions in the system. So the risk of failure is a little higher. And then also, and the main reason why is because as we get new features in the system, it can sometimes break functionality due to code conflicts. So if you've customized a screen and then Microsoft releases an update that adds something to the screen, there's a chance that there could be a conflict. Okay, so what to test? The default thinking might be, if you've been through a recent implementation, that I need to test everything. Everything that you did during UAT or your pilot sessions needs to be tested again during regression testing. And this isn't necessarily true. We really want to focus in on what are your customized areas, what are your critical business processes, and you can kind of apply the 80-20 rule to this. It's kind of a cliche a little bit, but identify the main processes that are critical to your business, and then plan your regression testing around that. You can use your UATs and your CRPs to help plan this a little bit, but you shouldn't be planning to test everything in the system. And if you talk to your process owners or subject matter experts within the company, they should have a good idea of what those core processes are. If this breaks, the company breaks, basically. So a few points here on how to identify those. Questions to ask yourself. If a change happens in this area, what does it have an impact on? Will it be something that we can deal with, that we can work around if there's a failure? Or is it something that if there's a failure, we really can't proceed? If we can't bill our customers, it's a very big problem, things like that. Volume of transactions is a good indicator of this. So if you have an area of the system where you're posting a very high volume of transactions, it's generally indicative that it's an important area and a very critical process. If there is sensitive or important information that you have that could be compromised, either customer information or employee information that can't be displayed to certain people, those things might be areas of where you would focus some testing. Another one is if there's an error that's kind of difficult to detect or correct when you get it in the production environment, things that can't be unwound can be candidates for automated testing. Regression testing. And then areas where the regression could result in a fine or a penalty. If you have a regulatory agency that governs you in some way, you might want to focus some of your regression testing in those areas as well so that you don't incur anything like that. And then once you have those areas identified, you kind of want to determine how large of a testing scope you have outside of that. So if you have a critical business process that you can't afford to have fail, it might not be just that one area that you need to test. You might actually need to test the upstream and the downstream areas from that as well to ensure that information is flowing into and out of that process appropriately as well. So when you come to planning your testing, the first thing you're going to want to do is assign a lead. This person is going to be the point person for your regression testing, planning, and execution. So they don't necessarily have to be doing all of the testing, but they need to be aware of when the updates are coming down the pipeline, when they get applied, who they need to pull in for the actual testing itself, how to build the test result reports, and who to report to. Generally, you get updates for a new release about 2 weeks before the GA date. That's the general availability date when they start applying it to production. So if the update comes in on, say, August 1st, then you'll get maybe 2 to 4 weeks after that before they start applying it to production. So that's about the length of time that you have to test. So it's actually quite a small period of time typically. There's some things that you can do where you can try to stay ahead of the updates a little bit and give yourself a little bit more time to test. There's also some techniques that I've got later on in the presentation that I'll show you. But you need to determine who is involved in testing so that they are on the ready, on the go, given the short time frame that we have for executing their tests. And then assign responsible people for each of these activities here. So who's going to update the test system? We want to make sure to update the data and the code. We don't want to be testing with data that's 6 months or a year or 2 years old. Make sure to go in and enable all of the features. By default, when you get an update, most of the features come in not enabled. So you want to enable all of your features. You want to update any configurations that you need to update. If you're taking a copy from production, you may need to go in and update, for example, integrations that you have pointing to various test systems and things like that, test data that you need to have in there. Then obviously you're going to execute your testing and record your results, report those results to the stakeholders, and then depending on the outcome of that, either update production or go back to Microsoft and request a postponement. Part of your test planning, you're going to select and implement your test management tool. You can use DevOps, or you can use Excel for that. We generally recommend using DevOps to do that, and I'll get into another reason for that in a minute. And then finally, there are some areas that might not be testable. So develop a risk mitigation strategy for those areas. An example would be something where you're relying on an ISV for an integration, and there's just no test system available for that integration. When it comes to creating the tests, one of the first things that you're going to want to do once you've identified what tests to execute is to prioritize those tests, both in order of execution and importance. So again, given the limited timeline that we have for regression testing, what we'll do is we'll execute the most important tests first. In some cases, you might have to execute some preliminary tests to get to your important tests. But the point is, if we can get to, say, an 80% or 90% confidence because we've executed our most important tests first, that helps enable us to make a decision, especially if you're stuck doing manual testing. If you can, optimize the tests to be executed as efficiently as possible, grouping them together so that if for example, you have creating a customer and creating a sales order, you could group those tests together so that they're kind of within the same scenario and they execute a lot more efficiently. Obviously, we're going to write scripts. Writing scripts is very important for continuity and consistency of testing, especially if you're doing manual testing. Scripts are important because your team members who are executing the tests might not be the same for every round of testing. Obviously, there's turnover within the business, and then there's changing roles within the business. And so it's really important to write the scripts so that we get the same inputs every time we test. We're going to identify the tests that you can automate. It's not always possible to automate tests. Some just require human interpretation or human input to do. Some integrations are an example of this. Reporting, like when you print a report within D365, the automated testing platform that comes with D365 can't interpret the output of a report. So those are just some examples. But we really want to try to automate just as much as we can because it results in very efficient execution. You can kick off your automated test run, and it can run overnight while everyone's going to sleep. And it records the results, and it can show them to you in the morning. It generally executes the test steps a lot faster than a person clicking through the system. It gives you much more rapid feedback. Again, this is important. We don't have that much time to test for our updates, so we can get feedback in a day or two, possibly, instead of taking 2 weeks to test. It results in very consistent execution. Like I said, when we're doing manual scripts, manual testing and writing scripts, you'll get consistent execution, but sometimes you get tester fatigue. If it's the same person who's been doing the regression testing every update for the last 4 updates, they can get fatigued by following those steps the same way every time, or they might decide, I don't need to look at the steps, and they're going to go into the system and kind of wing it a little bit. So automated testing doesn't do that. It never skips a step. Also, and this is a huge reason, is that it frees up business resources. Typically, it's going to be people from the business who are testing the updates because they know the process very well. So by doing automated testing, it frees up those business resources to continue doing value-added activities for the business. When we execute testing, you'll start off with a kickoff. So if you're having, say, 2 updates per year, that's roughly 6 months between updates. And we want to do a kickoff before every test iteration, just to bring kind of a reminder to the team, what's our timeline, what are our expectations. You can review the release notes with the testing team. So Microsoft puts out release notes with every new version. And especially if you are skipping some of the updates, you might have 2 or 3 sets of release notes to review with the team. The release notes are a good guide to know where to focus testing as well. So if Microsoft has made some major changes to one module or another, you may choose to focus more of your testing on those modules. One thing that we can do to get a jump start on testing is to join the PEEP program. This is the Preview Early Access program, and typically you'll get a PEEP drop of a release about 6 weeks before it's generally available. The PEEP releases are not final. Sometimes there are features that are added at the last minute to the GA release that were not in the PEEP release. Sometimes they remove things from the PEEP release if there turns out to be a quality issue with it. But it's a good way to get a jump start, and there's generally a pretty low barrier of entry of joining the PEEP program. Another one that you can do is the release validation program. So in this one, you basically share your database, you share your code with Microsoft, and you have to write some of the automated tests for your system, and you share that with them as well. And they will actually run those automated tests against the system, and if there's any issues, they will actually take on investigating the results of that. And then there's the first release program. So if you join this, you're basically updated to the new environment within about 2 weeks of it going into your sandbox environment. So it's a little bit of a shorter time frame, but the advantage that you get is that you've got dedicated support engineers that are monitoring that update, and they're monitoring the issues that come up after that update. When it comes to automated testing, there are some best practices that we can follow. Really good practice is to break tests into small chunks if you can. For one, it's much easier to record a small test. It takes less time to record a small test. It's also easier to maintain small tests, especially if you have to go in and make a change to it. You basically have to go in and re-record that test, so it's easier to maintain them. And also, you can mix and match them a little bit more easily too. So if you've built a series of tests for sales order shipping, for example, if you break it up into 3 or 4 tests, then you can try different variations of data with the sales orders, different customers, different items. You could change the process slightly so that in one scenario, you're doing a partial shipment, in one scenario, you're doing a complete shipment, but then you can actually reuse the original test case of creating that sales order.
Mike?
Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. We have a question regarding release validation.
Okay.
The question is, for the release validation program, will they accept and investigate test cases around customizations?
That is a good question, and it's not something that I've researched into too much. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so continuing on. So one of the best practices you can do is that you can leverage the formulas in Excel to randomize data or to build concatenations of data. Really important if you're going to be testing, say, creating a customer. Then Microsoft has a check built into it when you create a customer that it will look for duplicate customers in the database before it lets you create it. So you could build a formula that concatenates a random number with a customer name, and so you can repeat that test as many times as you want. We also want to try to control the variables as much as possible. So if your main business process that you want to test is creating a sales order or a purchase order, for example, it is a good practice to go ahead and create that master data as part of the scenario that you're doing. And the big reason for that is because you don't know if the variables surrounding the customer will be the same when you copy your database from production as when you recorded the test originally. So a good example is credit limits. If a customer happens to be over their credit limit, or say under their credit limit when you recorded the test, but when you play back the test during an update, they're over their credit limit, then the test is going to fail for an unexpected reason that you weren't anticipating when you recorded that test originally. So it's good practice to, if you're going to create a sales order, create the customer first, set the credit limit on the customer, and then run the test after that. Another best practice is to reset your usage data, so and your personalization. So your usage data and personalizations affect the behavior of the system and how certain forms are displayed, what the default view of certain forms is, and if you record the test in a different default view than it gets played back in, then that can also cause the test to fail as well as an artificial failure. Some automated testing tools that we have. Microsoft provides one called RSAT. It stands for Regression Suite Automation Tool. It is a free tool. It comes with Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain. And it's relatively easy to use. It uses the built-in task recorder. It gives you fairly basic automated testing functionality. It is a sort of a desktop-based application that integrates with DevOps, and then it integrates with D365. It's a little bit difficult to get set up, and I would call it probably like the Chevy of automated testing tools, because it covers the basics very well, but it doesn't go very deep into what you might want in your automated testing program. There is another tool that's out there called Executive Automates. This is an ISV. They're a web-based application. If you were looking for the Cadillac of automated testing, this would be them. Unlike a lot of other automated testing applications, Executive Automates is dedicated to the F&O space. So they didn't build it for websites in general. They built it to work with F&O. So any updates that come down the pipeline, if there's an incompatibility, they've got developers that are working on new feature functionality. For example, the new group controls. Executive Automates actually got their web-based application working with the new group controls before the RSAT team caught up with it. So you would have to actually go in and disable the new group control to run your automated test using RSAT, but you wouldn't have to do that with Executive Automate. It provides a lot of other functions like ability to loop through a test using an Excel spreadsheet with multiple rows of data, different data variations. You can do if-then conditions to do branching of your tests. You can also do negative tests where an error message, for example, will not cause the test to fail. If you're expecting the error message, you can tell it, actually, we want to push the system into a negative scenario, and if it gets an error message, that means it's a pass. It can also validate report output. You can do some other cool things with it, like performance testing and robotic process automation as well. And it is a lot easier to manipulate and copy and record the tests with Executive Automates as well. It's basically, you log into the website, you record the tests, or you start recording the test, it opens D365, you walk through the steps, you save it, and that's it, you're done. With RSAT, it's a little bit more long-winded because DevOps is kind of sitting in the middle, and you have to load the test into DevOps and then open in the desktop application and load them in there. So it's a little more long-winded, but still a perfectly good tool. And if you have basic testing requirements, then it's definitely a good option.
We had a couple more questions coming in here, Mike.
I figured there'd be some questions, yep.
Does Executive Automate not use the LCS test scripts?
No, it does not. It's built on its own, basically web-based framework. So if you've already got a large repository of test scripts recorded using the task recorder that's built into D365, then you're going to want to consider that when you're thinking about moving to another application. Most of them are not portable. So in D365, they record it as an XML file, and the XML file basically gets uploaded to DevOps and then goes into the testing platform. Executive automates everything is web-based, and it actually steps into its own recording tool.
And then I believe this is another question here. Do we update in the BPM library?
Yeah, so if you have an automated test that you've recorded, you could re-record it and then update that in the BPM library. And if you've got the connection set up between the BPM library and DevOps, then I believe it will update the test in there as well. I can double check that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah. Here are some resources. So whenever you've got an update, you can go to the What's New or Changed in the Finance and Operations Apps homepage. They've split this out into different sections for finance, supply chain, commerce, and human resources. So you can go into whichever apps that you're subscribed to and view the updates there. They do generally also show the, whenever a release goes in the PEEP, you can see the updates there as well. So you can kind of get an idea of the updates that are coming ahead of time. But like I said, that is subject to change. And then service update availability. This is basically when you can expect service updates to be coming down the pipeline. And right now, I believe they've planned them out until .24. So .20 just became GA last week. And so you basically got what are the dates for the next 4 releases after this one. And it shows you the peak dates, the GA dates, and then when they start auto updating it, and then also when the end of service is on it as well. Also, one of the things that we provide complimentary to our clients is sort of a concatenation of those what's new and changed pages. So Microsoft published these as an HTML web page. You have to kind of file through the pages. You've got to go back and forth between the 2 different apps or the 3 different apps that you're using. And so what we've done basically every time a release comes out is we'll go through and concatenate that into an Excel spreadsheet. We'll categorize it so that you can filter it by module. For example, if you're not using the project module, you can filter those enhancements out, or you can filter to just look for the platform updates, the things that are universal across the platform regardless of module. There's usually links in there, so if there's any more details that are out there within the Microsoft Docs website, there will be a link in there as well. So it basically poses a summary, an easy-to-read summary that you can go through with your team. And if you want more details, you can usually click on the link, and it'll take you into the larger page. It's usually Microsoft will write several paragraphs. Sometimes it's a longer page even than that. So it can be difficult to get through everything in a timely manner, which is why we came up with this. Any more questions?
I'm not seeing any more coming in right now. Let's talk about some upcoming events while we give people a chance to type here.
Yeah.
Sorry, there we go. So August 11th, we have a session about simplifying payroll and HR management. August 11th as well, we have a business intelligence session on D365 finance and supply chain management, game-changing insights and analytics. And then August 18th, we have top 5 reasons why now is the right time to move from Salesforce to Dynamics 365 customer engagement. So we look forward, we hope you all can join us for those. We did have another question come in while I was reading off those events. Do you have any customers that are using Executive Automates?
At this time, we have several customers who are in the implementation pipeline who are looking at it, although right now we don't have any actual live customers who are using it. So it is an impressive tool, though. I've looked at it pretty extensively. I've actually looked at maybe 6 or 7 automated testing solutions, and a lot of them say that they work with D365. Most of them usually had an issue somewhere. Microsoft has some custom page elements, dynamic page elements that most of the generic automated testing platforms will have a trouble identifying either during recording or during playback. They'll just hang. And Executive Automates was really the only one that I found, because it's purpose-built for D365, that it was able to just handle everything very smoothly and seamlessly.
What is the time frame to get set up with Executive Automate?
It's really very fast. In fact, if you contact us and you want a trial, we can get you set up with a trial. There's very little setup required. Basically, you just go in, you log in, you set up your environments, your systems, your logins, and you can start recording tests almost right away. I think it's actually faster to set up Executive Automates than it is to set up RSAT.
Awesome. And then last question, what is the process to engage with them?
With Executive Automats? Yeah, so we have contacts with them. So if you want to work with us or you want to work with one of your account rep, we can get you connected with them.
Awesome. We'll just wait one more second here in case there's any other questions. Okay, well, I'm not, here we go. How long is the trial for?
It's typically 30 days is how long the trial is for. They're pretty agreeable if you're very serious about evaluating the solution to extending that, but it starts out at 30 days.
And can we do a demo for Executive Automate? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could do another webinar where we do a demo of Executive Automates. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. If you're working with an account rep, I mean, we can obviously set up a more one-on-one demo instead of a webinar. It's typically about an hour or so, and we can get on. Basically, we get on the phone with them, and they have a person who is really an expert and can answer a lot more questions, a lot more in depth than I can, and can demo the application.